The day that brought old hearts together. The soft morning light fell gently over the quiet garden of a private estate in Italy. The wedding venue shimmered with calm golden tones as flowers in shades of ivory and blush framed every corner. Birds sang softly in the distance, and a light breeze moved through the air, carrying the scent of roses and lavender. It was the kind of morning that felt both peaceful and emotional, like the world was holding its breath for something beautiful about to happen. Inside one of the dressing rooms, Ana de Armas stood in front of a mirror, her reflection glowing softly. She looked stunning, but her heart was beating faster than ever. She smiled faintly at her own nervous reflection, whispering to herself that everything would be fine. This was her day, a day she never thought would come this way, with so many faces from her past walking into the same moment. Tom Cruise, standing a few rooms away, adjusted his cufflinks with a quiet smile. His eyes reflected both confidence and a strange kind of peace. He wasn't just getting married. He was starting over. The man who had seen fame, loneliness, and endless motion was finally slowing down to hold someone's hand with warmth and truth. But there was something no one could predict, something that would make this wedding more than just a ceremony. Among the guests arriving at the villa were two people whose names had always carried quiet stories. Stories whispered in Hollywood circles. Stories filled with respect, patience, and emotions that never truly faded. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. As their cars arrived one after the other, a gentle stir ran through the guests. No one had seen them together in a long time. Yet when they stepped out, there was no tension. Only a calm familiarity, as if time had been kind to their bond. Keanu wore a simple black suit. Nothing too loud, but everything about him carried warmth. Sandra, in a soft pastel gown, looked elegant and gentle. When their eyes met across the entrance, there was silence for a moment, followed by a small smile that said everything words could not. The last time they had been in the same place, cameras had surrounded them and lights had made it impossible to breathe freely. But now, in this private gathering, they were just two friends who had shared something rare, an unspoken connection built on kindness, respect, and care. Sandra approached him first, her steps quiet but confident. Keanu's expression softened immediately. "Hey," she said with a small laugh, "you clean up well?" Keanu smiled, that familiar, gentle smile that had melted hearts for decades. "You too. It's been a while." Their voices were low, but their tone carried memories, old films, quiet conversations, moments of laughter between takes, and the years that had quietly moved on. As they walked inside together, people noticed. It wasn't the kind of attention that came from gossip. It was admiration. Something about the way they carried themselves made others feel calm. They were like two souls who had seen the world, who had faced storms, and still managed to walk with humility. Anna noticed them as soon as they entered. Her face lit up. She had worked with both of them before, and she knew how genuine they were. She walked toward them with excitement, her wedding dress gliding softly across the marble floor. "You came," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "Of course we did," Sandra replied warmly, holding her hand. "No way we'd miss this." Keanu nodded, his calm voice adding, "This is your day, Anna. And it's beautiful already." As they talked, Tom joined them. His smile was genuine, and for a brief moment, all four stood together, symbols of talent, strength, and timeless connection. There was no ego, no pride, just mutual respect and quiet joy. Throughout the morning, Sandra and Keanu found themselves sitting side by side at times, sometimes exchanging light jokes, sometimes just watching the ceremony preparations unfold. Every few minutes, someone would walk by and smile at them, not because they were famous, but because their presence felt grounded, peaceful. But beneath the calm, both of them carried their own thoughts. Sandra thought about the years that had gone by, about how some people leave and yet never truly go away. She remembered how Keanu had once helped her through one of the toughest periods of her life, without fanfare, without asking for anything. Just pure kindness. He had shown up when she least expected anyone to. Keanu, meanwhile, looked at her and felt something deep, something that wasn't about love in the ordinary sense. It was admiration, a kind of gratitude for the light she had brought into his life during years when he didn't know how to smile. She had been his reminder that not every connection has to end in romance. Some are deeper than that. As the ceremony began, sunlight fell softly through the open glass roof. Anna and Tom stood under a canopy of white flowers, their hands joined. The vows were simple but heartfelt. Guests watched in silence, many holding back tears. When Anna's voice trembled during her vows, Sandra instinctively reached for Keanu's hand, just for a second. It was natural, honest, and pure. Keanu looked at her, surprised but comforted. Neither of them said a word. That silent gesture said everything about empathy, about being there without needing to explain why. As the vows ended and applause filled the air, the camera crew captured every emotion. Yet, among all the frames, one moment stood out later. The one where Sandra and Keanu shared that quiet, supportive glance as the world clapped around them. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the garden for the reception, the evening light began to fall. Soft music played, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. Sandra found herself walking near the fountain, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. Keanu was already there, sitting quietly on the stone edge, watching the sunset. She walked up beside him, smiling faintly. "Still not much of a crowd person, huh?" she teased. Keanu chuckled softly. "You know me too well." They sat there, the noise of celebration distant behind them. The golden sky reflected on the water, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped again, like years ago when they had first become friends. "You ever think," Sandra said quietly, "that some connections don't fade because they were never supposed to?" Keanu looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said softly, "some just stay quiet. But they stay." The wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of roses again. Neither moved. They didn't need to. The world could dance behind them, but for now, they were exactly where they needed to be. Two souls who understood the beauty of silence, the comfort of presence, and the power of kindness. In that quiet moment, their friendship became something eternal, an emotion that didn't need words, promises, or endings. It simply existed, steady and true, and as the first stars began to appear above the Italian sky, Sandra looked up and whispered softly, "This wedding might just be more about love than anyone realizes." Keanu smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Yeah," he said, "love takes many forms, and maybe this is one of them." The night deepened. The music grew louder, but for those few minutes by the fountain, everything was perfect, simple, human, and deeply moving. The quiet glow after the applause, the wedding night in Tuscany glowed like a dream. Lanterns hung from the olive trees, their soft light flickering against the stone walls of the villa. Laughter floated through the air, blending with music, and the faint hum of crickets filled the spaces between conversations. It was a night meant to be remembered, but for some, it was about more than celebration. Sandra Bullock stood near the corner of the garden, a glass of sparkling water in her hand. She had chosen not to drink tonight, not because of control, but because she wanted to remember every second. She wanted her mind clear, her heart open. From where she stood, she could see Anna and Tom on the dance floor, holding each other with quiet joy. They looked happy in a way that came from peace, not performance. But her gaze drifted beyond them, toward a man standing near the back, half hidden by the light. Keanu Reeves. He was speaking with one of the guests, smiling politely, but his eyes carried that same stillness that had always made him different. He never tried to steal the room. He never needed to. His presence alone calmed people as if he carried a small universe of quiet strength within him. Sandra remembered how, years ago, during one of their first press interviews together, she had told a reporter that Keanu had the kindest eyes in the room. At the time, it had made headlines, but what no one knew was that she had meant every word. His kindness wasn't loud. It lived in small things, in how he listened, how he remembered details, how he treated everyone the same way, no matter who they were. A soft laugh interrupted her thoughts. Anna walked toward her, glowing under the golden light. "You're not dancing?" Anna asked playfully. Sandra smiled. I'm better at watching people be happy. Anna reached out her hand. You've watched enough tonight. Come join us. For a second, Sandra hesitated. But before she could reply, another voice came from behind her. Calm, deep, familiar. If she dances, I might too. She turned around. Keanu was standing there, his smile gentle, his tone half teasing, half earnest. Anna grinned instantly. Perfect. Then both of you have no excuse. Before Sandra could protest, Anna took her hand and pulled her toward the dance floor. Keanu followed, his steps slow and easy. The music changed. Something soft, slow, a melody filled with warmth. And for a few minutes, time melted away. The crowd watched as the two pairs danced, Tom and Anna lost in love, Sandra and Keanu moving like two old souls who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. At one point, Keanu leaned closer and whispered, You still count the beats before stepping in. Sandra laughed softly, shaking her head. You still notice everything. It's a habit, he said, eyes glinting. You were always the one who made it look easy, and you were always the one pretending not to enjoy it. He smiled, that quiet, honest smile that made her heart soften in ways words couldn't reach. Around them, guests smiled quietly. There was something unspoken about the sight of them together. No romance, no drama, just two people who shared a history filled with kindness, patience, and understanding. In a world obsessed with noise, they carried silence beautifully. After the song ended, applause rose across the garden. Anna clapped, laughing, her joy contagious. Sandra stepped back, smiling, cheeks slightly flushed. Keanu gave a small bow, his eyes meeting hers for a second longer than necessary. As the next song began, they walked off the floor together. Sandra reached for a seat near the fountain, the same spot they had shared earlier. Keanu followed, carrying 2 glasses of water. You didn't have to, she said softly. Old habits, he replied. I still remember how you used to forget to drink on long sets. Sandra looked down, smiling faintly. You still remember that? I remember everything that mattered, he said simply. A pause followed. The sound of laughter and music floated behind them, but in their corner, it felt like another world. Quieter, softer. It's strange, she said finally. Being here, watching them. It feels like watching 2 worlds finally find peace. It does, Keanu said. But it's also a reminder that no matter how far we go, some people always stay close, even without trying. She turned toward him. You believe that? I live by it, he replied quietly, because distance never changed what was real. His words lingered in the air. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Sometimes silence was enough. A few minutes later, Anna and Tom joined them. Tom, still full of energy, laughed. You two were incredible out there. You got that old Hollywood grace. Sandra chuckled. That's kind of you to say. No, Tom said warmly. It's true. The way you two move, it's like watching friendship itself take form. Anna nodded, eyes soft. There's something special about you both. It's rare. They all shared a quiet moment, one that didn't need cameras or scripts. It was real. 4 people, different paths, same humanity. As the night grew deeper, Sandra and Keanu found themselves walking along the garden's edge. The path was lit by small candles placed inside glass jars. Their footsteps were slow, unhurried. Remember the lake house premiere? Sandra asked suddenly. Keanu smiled. How could I forget? You made me wait 30 minutes because your shoes hurt. She laughed. They still would. You were worth the wait, he said simply, his tone soft, almost playful, but sincere enough to make her heart ache just a little. They stopped near a quiet balcony overlooking the Tuscan hills. The stars stretched endlessly above them, For a while, they said nothing. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of memories, gratitude, and unspoken respect. Finally, Sandra said, "You ever think about how fragile all this is? The fame, the lights, the noise. It all fades, but moments like this, they stay." Keanu nodded slowly. "That's why I hold on to the good ones. They're rare." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the lanterns. "You've always been one of the good ones, Keanu." He didn't answer right away. He looked down, a small, humble smile appearing on his face. "So have you, Sandra." And for a long moment, they just stood there. Two souls who had lived through storms, yet still carried light. Near the end of the night, as guests began leaving, Anna approached them again. Her voice was softer now, full of emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being here. It means more than you know." Keanu placed a hand over his heart. "Thank you for letting us be part of it." Sandra smiled warmly. "You made today beautiful, Anna. Not just for you two, for everyone here." Anna hugged her tightly, then Keanu. And as the couple walked away, hand in hand, Sandra and Keanu stayed behind, watching them disappear into the glow of lanterns. "You think they'll make it?" Sandra asked softly. "I hope so," Keanu said. "They've got what matters. Kindness. That's what keeps love alive." Sandra nodded, her eyes misty but peaceful. "Kindness," she repeated. "It always comes back, doesn't it?" Keanu looked at her. "Always." The night ended with a gentle breeze moving through the trees, carrying the last echoes of laughter. As Sandra walked back to her car, she looked once more toward the garden, toward the spot where she and Keanu had shared a moment of silence, laughter, and truth. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something lift off her heart. Not sadness, not nostalgia. Something softer. Peace. She didn't look back again, but Keanu did. He stood for a few seconds, watching the stars, before whispering to himself, "Some endings aren't really endings. They're reminders that we were lucky to have met." The morning after, where memories breathe again, the morning after the wedding was quieter than anyone expected. The Tuscan villa, which had been full of music and laughter the night before, now rested under a soft blanket of mist. The air smelled of rain and roses, and the hills in the distance were wrapped in pale gold light. A new day had arrived, but for some hearts, the night's warmth still lingered. Keanu Reeves woke early. He wasn't used to sleeping long hours, especially after emotional days. For him, mornings were sacred, a time to breathe before the world woke up. He stepped out onto the balcony of his small guest room, the stone floor cool beneath his feet. The vineyards stretched out endlessly before him, the dew shimmering like tiny stars. He held a cup of black coffee in one hand and watched the sunlight slowly touch the earth. Moments like this grounded him, reminded him that even in a world built on lights and cameras, nature was still the only thing that didn't ask for anything in return. Down below, near the garden, he noticed a figure walking slowly by the fountain. Her familiar gait made him pause. Sandra Bullock. She wore a light shawl over her shoulders and carried her shoes in one hand, walking barefoot on the grass. There was something peaceful yet deeply human about her, someone who didn't need perfection to be graceful. Without overthinking, Keanu left his room, walking down the old wooden stairs that creaked slightly with every step. As he approached the garden, Sandra turned, sensing his presence before hearing him. Her smile appeared softly, the kind that carried both surprise and comfort. "Morning already?" she said gently. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "Too much thinking." "About what?" He shrugged lightly. "Yesterday, everything, people, moments, how fast it all goes." Sandra nodded, her eyes drifting toward the distant hills. Yeah, one day it's all noise, and the next morning it's just silence and memories. They sat near the fountain again, the same spot that had somehow become theirs. The water made soft ripples under the morning light. "You know what I noticed?" she said after a while. "What?" "How peaceful Anna looked yesterday. Not just happy, peaceful. That's rare." Keanu smiled faintly. "It's what happens when you find someone who listens more than they talk." Sandra glanced at him, amused. "You mean someone like you?" He chuckled quietly. "Maybe. But not everyone likes silence." "You'd be surprised," she said softly. "Sometimes silence says what words can't." For a moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the water, the breeze, and the distant chirping of birds. Then, unexpectedly, Sandra's tone grew quieter. "You remember the time we wrapped up filming and just sat on the curb eating takeout?" Keanu's smile deepened. "Of course, you dropped soy sauce on your dress." She laughed, shaking her head. "And you didn't tell me until after the photos." "It was too good a memory to ruin," he said gently. That one line made her pause. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was understanding, the kind that only people with shared history could feel. As the morning grew brighter, more guests began to wake. Some walked through the gardens, others gathered for breakfast. Anna and Tom appeared eventually, glowing even in their exhaustion. When they saw Keanu and Sandra together by the fountain, they smiled knowingly, as if witnessing something quietly beautiful. Anna approached them first. "You two are up early," she said, her voice soft with warmth. "We're not as young as you two," Sandra teased. "Our bodies still think it's yesterday." Tom laughed. "You both were the highlight of the night. People couldn't stop talking about how genuine you were." Keanu shook his head humbly. "We just danced. You two made it magical." Anna sat beside Sandra, resting her head lightly on her shoulder. "Yesterday reminded me that kindness is what keeps people connected, even when time changes everything." "You're right," Sandra said, stroking Anna's hair gently. "And I think that's why you two will last. Because you lead with kindness, not pride." Anna's eyes glistened as she whispered, "Thank you. It means more than you know." After breakfast, the group planned a small farewell walk through the nearby village. The cobbled streets were still quiet, lined with pastel houses and small shops that hadn't yet opened. Keanu walked beside Sandra, their steps slow and unhurried. At one corner, an old woman selling flowers called out, "Buongiorno!" She offered them a single white rose each. Sandra took hers with gratitude, smiling. Keanu bowed slightly, his simple grazie making the woman beam as they continued. Walking, Sandra looked at him and said softly, "You always make people feel seen. Do you know that?" He turned slightly surprised. "I just treat them how I'd want to be treated." "That's exactly why it matters," she said. There was a brief silence again, not awkward, but peaceful. Then she added quietly, "Sometimes I think that's what makes you different. You don't just exist in people's lives. You leave calm behind." Keanu didn't reply. He looked down at the white rose in his hand, then gently handed it to her. "Then maybe I'll leave this calm with you." She took it, her eyes soft, touched by the small gesture. "You always find the right words when no one expects them." He smiled faintly. "And you always hear them when no one else does." They kept walking until they reached a small viewpoint overlooking the Tuscan Valley. The world stretched endlessly below them, fields, vineyards, roads that disappeared into the morning haze. "You know," Sandra said slowly, "there was a time when I thought fame was everything, that it would make life easier, but it doesn't. It just gets louder." Keanu nodded. "And you learn to protect the quiet parts of yourself." "Exactly," she said. "And maybe that's why I value mornings like this. They remind me I'm still human." He turned to her, his tone thoughtful. "You are more human than most people I've ever met." Her eyes met his, and for a brief second, the world seemed to pause again, not with romantic tension, but with mutual recognition. A connection that had survived time, distance, and silence. As they walked back toward the villa, a light drizzle began to fall. Keanu took off his jacket and held it above them. She smiled as raindrops touched her hair. "You always do that," she said softly. "What?" "Shield people from storms, even the ones you don't have to." He didn't respond. He just smiled, eyes on the path ahead, as the rain began to fall harder. When they reached the villa, the others were gathering their bags ready to leave. The air was filled with goodbye hugs, photos, and laughter. Anna came to hug Sandra again, whispering, "Thank you for reminding us what real connections look like." Sandra smiled, holding her close. "Keep loving the way you do, Anna. It's rare and it's beautiful." Then, turning to Keanu, Tom shook his hand firmly. "You're a quiet force, man. Thanks for being here." Keanu smiled modestly. "Thank you for inviting me. It was healing." Soon, cars began to drive away down the long gravel road. Keanu and Sandra were among the last to leave. Their cars stood side by side. Before she got in, Sandra looked at him. "You heading back to L.A.? "Yeah, you?" "Same. Maybe we'll cross paths again." He nodded lightly. "Maybe we already have." They both smiled. It was one of those goodbyes that didn't feel final, just part of an ongoing story that neither of them needed to explain. As Sandra's car pulled away, Keanu stood for a moment, watching the dust rise behind her tires. He could still hear her laughter, soft and distant. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude for the people who had stayed kind, even when life wasn't. He whispered under his breath, "She's still the same. Maybe even kinder." And then, with one last look at the villa, he walked toward his car, the rain now softening into mist again. The wedding was over, but something else had begun. A quiet reflection that would follow both of them back into their worlds. When silence followed them home, the world had returned to its usual rhythm. Flashing lights, film sets, deadlines, and endless travel. But for Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, something about life felt quietly different after that Tuscan wedding. They both carried an invisible calm, the kind that only comes after being reminded of what truly matters. In Los Angeles, the air was dry and bright. Days were longer now, the sun burning softly through glass towers. Sandra's home sat on a hill above the city, surrounded by trees and silence. She had always liked it that way, away from noise, away from the constant hum of people asking for more. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding. She had returned to filming, trying to blend into the fast pace again. But something inside her refused to hurry. When her assistant asked if she wanted to attend a party that night, Sandra smiled faintly and said no. She wanted quiet. She wanted coffee, a blanket, and the sound of her own thoughts. As the evening arrived, she sat by her window, watching the city lights flicker below. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined Keanu on his motorcycle, that familiar figure gliding through the night. Alone, peaceful, content. She hadn't spoken to him since they left Italy. No messages, no calls. Yet in her heart, it didn't feel like distance. It felt like understanding. Some connections didn't need constant words. They simply existed, breathing quietly between two people who knew how to listen. But that night, something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze for a moment. Keanu Reeves, the name appeared on her screen. She smiled softly, then answered. "Hey," she said, her voice gentle. "Hey," came his reply, calm as ever. Did I call too late? No, I was just thinking about coffee. He chuckled lightly. Of course you were. Same here. There was a brief pause, the kind that doesn't feel empty, just full of shared air. I didn't want to bother you, he said finally. Just wanted to check in. The wedding, it stayed with me. Me too, she admitted. It reminded me of everything I've been forgetting lately. Like what? Like how simple moments make life feel real again. Keanu was quiet for a second. Then, in a softer tone, he said, You sounded tired that day. Are you okay now? She smiled faintly. I'm fine, just thinking more than usual. That's never a bad thing, he said gently. Sometimes thoughts heal you when words can't. The conversation stretched naturally, flowing from memories to laughter to silence again. You know, Sandra said suddenly, Anna called me yesterday. She said she's planning to visit Ella soon. Maybe we should all meet up, like a small reunion. That'd be nice, Keanu said. I'd like that. His voice carried warmth, the kind that made people feel safe. Before they hung up, she said quietly, Thank you for calling, Keanu. You always know when to reach out. I just listened to instinct, he said softly, and my instinct said you needed a voice tonight. After the call ended, Sandra sat still for a moment, staring out at the city again. The silence around her didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of connection, care, and quiet gratitude. A few days later, Anna and Tom arrived in Los Angeles. The city greeted them with sunshine and flashing cameras. Despite their global fame, they wanted their reunion to be simple, just a small dinner among friends. The restaurant was hidden on a quiet street, lit by candlelight and soft jazz. Sandra arrived first, her usual calm presence filling the space. Moments later, Keanu walked in. Leather jacket, unhurried steps, that same quiet grace that drew every eye without trying. You're early, Sandra said, smiling. Old habit, he replied. I hate making people wait. She laughed. You never change. Neither do you, he said, pulling out a chair beside her. Soon after, Anna and Tom arrived, their laughter filling the air. The four of them hugged like old friends who had known each other long before fame existed. You both look peaceful, Anna said, looking at Keanu and Sandra. Like the world finally slowed down for you, Sandra smiled. Maybe it did. Or maybe we just stopped running from it. The waiter brought food, and as they ate, the conversation turned deeper. Tom shared stories about his early career, moments of doubt, times when kindness from others had saved him. Anna spoke about her fears, about how, even in success, loneliness sometimes found a way in. Keanu listened intently, nodding slowly. When it was his turn to speak, his words were few but heavy with meaning. Loneliness, he said quietly, isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's the space where truth grows. The table fell silent for a moment. Even Sandra, who had always known Keanu's reflective side, felt those words settle deep in her heart. And what truth grew for you? She asked softly. He looked at her, eyes calm. That life's not about how many people love you. It's about how many you've loved without expecting anything back. Anna smiled through tears. Tom nodded slowly. That's rare, Sandra whispered. To give without keeping count. It's the only way to stay human, Keanu said simply. The rest of the evening flowed with laughter and warmth. Yet under all the joy, Sandra felt a quiet realization growing inside her, that some bonds weren't just friendships. They were lessons disguised as people. After dinner, as the four of them walked out, Anna stopped suddenly. Wait, she said, pointing toward the sky. Look at that. Above them, a meteor streaked across the night, quick, bright, silent. A shooting star, Tom said. Anna clasped her hands. Make a wish. They all stood still for a few seconds, the star fading into the horizon. Sandra closed her eyes briefly. Her wish wasn't for fame or love or success. It was simple. She wished that kindness would keep finding its way back to people, no matter how far apart they drifted. Keanu glanced at her as she opened her eyes again. "Did you wish for something?" "Yeah," she said softly. "For something good to last," he nodded. "Then it already has." The following week, Sandra returned to her routine, filming, meetings, and interviews. Yet every time her phone buzzed, she found herself hoping it was Keanu. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. But when it was, even a short message was enough to make her day lighter. "You doing okay?" "Yeah, just tired." "You?" "Same. But it's a good tired." Simple words, but full of meaning. The bond between them began to deepen again. Quietly, naturally, without either of them trying to define it. They didn't need to. It wasn't love in the traditional sense. It was something rarer. Two souls who understood each other's silences more than anyone else's words. One evening, Sandra sat outside her house watching the sunset, when a motorbike sound echoed up the hill. She smiled before even turning. "Keanu." He parked, pulled off his helmet, and smiled softly. "Thought I'd bring coffee." "Peace offering for interrupting your silence." She laughed. "You always know when to show up." "It's a gift," he said lightly. They sat side by side on her porch, sipping coffee as the sun melted into the horizon. The sky burned orange and pink, then turned violet as stars began to appear. "You ever think," she said softly, "that maybe people like us, we're meant to meet again and again, just to remind each other what still matters?" Keanu turned his head slightly toward her. "I do think that. Every time we meet." Their eyes met, not as lovers, not as colleagues, but as two hearts that had learned to find comfort in each other's honesty. As the first cool breeze of night swept through the trees, Sandra whispered, "Some things never fade." Keanu smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "The good things never do." The quiet truth beneath the stars, the city was alive that night. Cars hummed through the streets, lights blinked like restless thoughts, and somewhere above it all, the sky stretched wide and endless, a quiet contrast to the noise below. In that wide silence, somewhere near the Hollywood Hills, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves sat outside her home, the night wind brushing past them softly. They had been there for hours now, long after the coffee turned cold. Their conversation had slowed to pauses, laughter had faded into comfortable silence, and yet neither of them moved. Sometimes the best moments weren't about what was said, they were about what didn't need to be. Keanu leaned back slightly, eyes fixed on the stars. "Do you ever think," he said slowly, "how strange it is that we meet people who end up shaping us without trying?" Sandra tilted her head, smiling faintly. "You mean like fate?" He shrugged. "Maybe not fate, maybe just timing. Like the universe decides when two people should cross paths. Not too early, not too late." "And you think that's what we are?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his expression gentle. "I think that's what we've always been. Right place, right time, and every time." She laughed under her breath. "You make it sound simple." "It is," he said. "We just complicate it with expectations." Sandra turned her gaze toward the city again. Below them, lights sparkled like fallen stars. "You know what I think?" she said quietly. "I think some people come into your life to remind you what real peace feels like, even if they don't stay forever." Keanu nodded. "Then maybe peace isn't about keeping people. It's about remembering how they made you feel." For a moment, silence settled again, the kind that didn't feel awkward. It felt sacred. The night air carried the faint scent of jasmine, and somewhere nearby, a dog barked faintly before the world fell still again. Then, breaking the quiet, Sandra whispered, "You ever wonder why the world loves to imagine us together? All those stories, interviews, people asking, it never really stopped." Keanu chuckled softly. "Because people like happy endings. And maybe we looked like one. But were we?" she asked, looking straight at him now. He met her gaze, his voice low and sincere. "Maybe we were something better. A beginning that never needed an ending." Her eyes softened, emotion flickering beneath them. "You always know how to turn words into calm," she murmured. "You always know how to hear what's behind them," he replied quietly. The night stretched deeper, the stars brighter now. And as they sat there, memories began to rise, uninvited but welcome. She remembered the first time they met years ago when both were younger, busier, less patient. He had walked into a room with quiet confidence, and she had smiled, thinking he seemed different, not chasing attention, but content just to exist. He remembered her laughter on set, how it filled spaces that even silence couldn't hold. She had been kindness disguised as chaos, warmth in motion, and even then, he had known she was someone rare. As they sat side by side now, both could feel that invisible thread that time had never managed to cut. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense. It was deeper, steadier, built on years of unspoken gratitude and gentle care. "You ever think about going back?" she asked suddenly. "Back where?" "To that time, when everything was simple. Before the noise." Keanu thought for a moment, then shook his head lightly. "No, I think about bringing that simplicity forward instead. Into now." She smiled faintly. "Trust you to find the wisdom in everything." He laughed softly. "You make it sound like a curse." "No," she said. "More like a gift." They sat there for another long while until Sandra finally stood. "Come inside," she said. "It's getting cold." Keanu hesitated for a second, then followed. Inside, her home was warm and minimal, filled with soft colors, books, and framed memories. The fire crackled gently as she lit it, filling the room with an orange glow. "Still hate fireplaces?" he teased, remembering how she once burned popcorn trying to start one on a movie set. She laughed. "I learned. Don't underestimate me." "I never did," he said, smiling. They sat near the fire, the warmth wrapping around them like an old song. The walls seemed to hum softly, filled with years of friendship and trust. "You ever feel," Sandra said quietly, "that we keep meeting to teach each other something new every time?" Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Maybe we just keep reminding each other what we already know." "And what's that?" "That kindness doesn't fade. It changes people." She looked into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "You know, after the wedding, I kept thinking about that moment by the fountain." The silence. It stayed with me. "Me too," he said softly. "It felt like time stopped for a second." "Maybe it did," she said. "And maybe we needed that pause, to remember who we are without the world watching." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You ever notice," he said, "that the world claps for the loudest people, but the ones who stay kind never ask for applause?" "Maybe they don't need it," she said softly, "because they already know who they are." Their eyes met again, and in that quiet look, they both knew they were talking about each other. No words needed to confirm it. The clock ticked softly in the background. The rain began again outside, tapping gently against the windows. And in that calm rhythm, Sandra felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, not because of who he was, but because of what he represented, steadiness in a world that never stopped spinning. Keanu, watching her, felt the same. She had always carried light, even in sadness, even when the world misunderstood her. She was a reminder that empathy wasn't weakness. It was strength wrapped in gentleness. "Keanu," she said quietly, "promise me something." "Anything. No matter where life takes us, never stop being this version of you. The quiet one who listens, who makes people feel seen." He smiled faintly. "Only if you promise to never stop being the one who believes people can change." She nodded. "Deal." They both laughed softly, and the moment settled, not as a goodbye, but as another chapter in a story that kept writing itself through every shared silence. After some time, Keanu stood, ready to leave. "You'll be okay?" he asked gently. "I am," she said, "but it helps knowing you're somewhere in this city." "I'll always be somewhere," he said, smiling that quiet, reassuring smile she had come to know too well. She walked him to the door. Outside, the rain had eased into a soft drizzle. He put on his helmet, but before leaving, he turned back one last time. "You know what I realized tonight?" he said. "What?" "That we're not unfinished. We're just continuing it in different ways." She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, and maybe that's the best kind of story, the one that never really ends. He smiled, then started his bike. The engine hummed softly, fading as he disappeared into the night. Sandra stood by the door long after he was gone, the rain brushing her face through the open frame. Somewhere in her chest, something gentle stirred. Not sadness, not longing, just gratitude. She whispered to the night, "You never really left, did you?" And though the city below roared on, in her heart there was peace. Because some bonds don't need presence, they only need truth. When time finally stood still, the weeks after that night drifted by quietly, each day blending into the next like soft watercolor strokes. Los Angeles moved at its usual hurried pace, but inside Sandra Bullock's world there was a new rhythm. Slower, more meaningful. She found herself smiling at small things again. The sound of rain, the smell of coffee, the light through her kitchen window. And sometimes, when she walked past the porch where Keanu had once sat beside her, she could still feel his calm lingering there, like an old melody that refused to fade. Keanu, meanwhile, was across town working on a new film. His days were long, full of cameras and bright lights, but even in the chaos, he carried something different now, an inner stillness. Every once in a while, during breaks between takes, he would glance at the sky and think of Sandra, not with longing, but with gratitude. It had been almost a month since their last meeting. No texts, no calls, yet both of them knew they didn't need to speak every day. They were connected by something deeper, an understanding that didn't rely on words. But life, in its quiet wisdom, had plans neither expected. One morning, as Sandra was walking into a studio for a charity interview, she saw a familiar silhouette near the entrance, tall, calm, and unmistakable. "Keanu." He turned, almost as if he had felt her presence before seeing her. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to pause, just for a second, like it always did when they found each other unexpectedly. "You're early," she said, smiling softly. "Habit," he replied. "I heard you were doing an interview here today. And you just appeared?" He shrugged lightly. "Maybe the universe likes surprises," she laughed quietly. "Maybe it just likes making us meet in random places." They walked inside together, their steps naturally falling in sync. The studio staff looked up, surprised to see them side by side. Two legends, walking with such ease, such quiet grace. After the interview, they sat on a bench outside, sipping tea under the shade of an old oak tree. People passed by, recognizing them, yet neither seemed to care. The noise of fame couldn't touch the peace between them. "I watched your latest movie," Sandra said. "It felt different, calmer, more grounded." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I just stopped acting so much." "You were never acting," she said softly. "You were always just you." Her words lingered. There was a tenderness in her voice that made Keanu look away for a second, unsure how to hold so much sincerity at once. "You've changed too," he said finally. "How?" "You look lighter. Like you finally stopped carrying everyone else's weight." She chuckled softly. "I'm learning." "You helped," he smiled. "We help each other. Always have." The wind moved gently through the trees, scattering a few leaves at their feet. The world felt softer, slower, as if time had finally decided to take a deep breath. "You ever think," Sandra said quietly, "about how we met at Anna's wedding by accident?" Keanu looked thoughtful. "I don't think it was an accident." "You think it was meant to happen?" He nodded slowly. "Some things are too perfectly timed to be coincidence." Sandra's eyes softened. Maybe Anna's wedding wasn't just about her and Tom. Maybe it was the universe reminding us that kindness brings people back together. Keanu smiled faintly, that rare, genuine smile that always reached his eyes. "You might be right. Sometimes love hides in the background, not as romance, but as recognition." "Recognition?" she repeated. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You see someone again after years and realize they never stopped being your safe place." Sandra looked down, her throat tightening slightly. And what if that someone keeps showing up, not to stay, but to remind you that peace still exists? Then you thank them, Keanu said softly. And you keep walking, knowing they'll always be somewhere quietly cheering for you. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence between them was full of years, memories, smiles, and the kind of gratitude that words couldn't hold. As the sun began to set, they decided to take a short walk through the park nearby. People smiled as they passed, but no one disturbed them. There was something sacred about their presence. Two souls who had lived fully, fallen quietly, and risen with grace. They reached a small bridge that overlooked a pond. The sky above them burned with orange and violet streaks, and their reflections shimmered in the water below. "You ever wonder?" Sandra said softly. "What people will remember about us when we're gone?" Keanu took a deep breath. "I hope they remember kindness. Not fame, not success, just how we treated people." "Me too," she said. "Because that's what lasts." He turned to her. "You've always lived that way, Sandra. Every time the world looked one way, you chose the quieter, kinder path." She smiled faintly. "And you've always made silence feel like home." The air grew cooler as evening approached. Sandra wrapped her arms around herself lightly, and Keanu, without thinking, took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. "You still do that," she said softly. "What?" "Take care of people without making it a big deal." He smiled gently. "Maybe it's just who I am." "No," she whispered. "It's who you choose to be. Every day." As they stood there, the first stars began to appear. And in that moment, it didn't feel like Hollywood or fame or memory. It just felt human, raw, simple, real. After a long silence, Sandra said, "You know what I think the real story is?" "What?" "Not that we met again at a wedding. But that after everything, years, distance, life, and we still show up for each other. Quietly, without asking. That's rare." Keanu looked at her for a long moment, his eyes warm with something unspoken. Then maybe that's what love really is. Showing up, even when the world stops watching. Her heart softened at those words. There was no grand confession, no cinematic ending, just truth. The kind that doesn't fade when the lights go out. The sky above them deepened into a blanket of stars. The wind carried the faint scent of the ocean, and for a while, neither wanted to move. Finally, Sandra said, "Promise me something. Anything. No matter where we go from here, never let the world harden you." He nodded gently. "And you promise me one thing, too." "What?" "Never let it silence your kindness." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Deal." They stood there, side by side, watching the last light disappear beyond the horizon. No grand ending, no goodbye, just the quiet certainty that they would always find each other again. In laughter, in silence, in the kindness they left behind. As the stars shimmered above, Keanu whispered softly, almost to himself, "Some stories don't need an ending. They just need to be remembered." Sandra turned toward him, her voice barely above the night wind. "Then let this one be remembered, not for fame, not for love, but for peace." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "For peace," he repeated softly. And with that, they walked back slowly, their shadows merging under the dim glow of the streetlights. Somewhere behind them, the world kept moving, loud, bright, restless. But for them, everything had already slowed into stillness. Two hearts, one truth: some connections don't fade. They evolve. They remind. They heal.